Okay, welcome all. So this is the first Key and Coffee chat that Tamsin and I decided to put together. And we've been a bit overwhelmed with registrations. I was saying earlier, we've had close to 80 people sign up to this. We've got coming up on 40 people online at the moment. This kind of limits our ability to do an interactive round the coffee table chat. So for this one, we're going to turn everybody's videos off and their mics off, and Tamsin and I will have a bit of discussion, and then we'll get you in if you have questions or comments towards the end. We had planned this to just be as long as it takes you to drink a mug of coffee, so about 30 minutes we had aimed for. So try and keep it short and sweet, and we'll look for feedback on it. So if you prefer something longer or shorter, then you can certainly let us know. If you are seeing Tamsin and I as very small pictures on your screen, you might want to take the opportunity to hide non-active video users. So if you hover over any of the people's names, there's three little dots appear. Click on that, and then click right down at the bottom, hide non-video participants, and everybody should disappear, and you get a nice big picture of Tamsin and I in your screen. We are recording this so that people who can't make it today can catch up with it at a later date. So again, thank you for joining. I'm Alasdair Cameron. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Director of Strategic Engagement with PraxisAuril. Tamsin, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, so hi to everybody. I'm sure that I know many of you by name, if not by sight. So I'm Director of Policy and Communications at PraxisAuril.
Okay, so just quickly some protocols for our chat. Tamsin and I will have a bit of conversation. We will be trying to monitor the Zoom chat as we go through. So if you want to post in there, just make it to everybody, and we'll catch that. When we get towards the end, and we open it up for questions, we'll use the raise hand feature, which you can access through clicking on the manage participants, and then there should be a raise hand option come up, and when you click that, you jump to the top of our list, and we will try to come to you with video and audio if we can. If you have any reason why that's not appropriate, then just put your question in the group chat and say I'm not able to share video and audio, and we'll try and address it. So as I said at the start, Tamsin and I imagined this as a quick chat with a cup of coffee to go through. The first one that jumped to our mind was to do the KE Concordat, which was launched feels like a couple of weeks ago by Universities UK and Guild HE. The group led by Trevor McMillan from Keele University, we had Sean Fielding, our chair, sitting on that group as well. And to give it its proper name, it's a Concordat for the Advancement of Knowledge Exchange in Higher Education. We're calling it the KE Concordat, or KEC, I suppose. Tamsin, do you want to give us maybe a bit of history as to how we got to where we are?
Yeah, so so this for me, this really starts with I suppose the HEFKE project, the KE framework project that they kicked off in about 2015, and then Trevor McMillan's report in 2016, which was about assessing the state of technology transfer in the UK, which is a very positive report for the sector actually. And one which I think we need to kind of keep front of mind at the moment when the spotlight is firmly on knowledge exchange again. And that report really focused on leadership for knowledge exchange, not necessarily at the kind of research office TTO level, but at the very top of higher education institutions. And also, I always remember from that report, Trevor talking about ambition and wanting universities to be ambitious in their knowledge exchange strategies. Then, of course, quite quickly, soon after that, we had the industrial strategy, which introduced knowledge exchange in its ideas chapter and introduced the knowledge exchange framework, particularly. Joe Johnson launched that, of course. And the Concordat was developed, triggered at the same time and developed alongside that. So we've been kind of really focusing on the KEF metrics because there's been a lot of activity around that in the last 2 years. The Concordat has had a slightly lower profile, but we know, of course, that Sean Fielding, our chair, has been involved in the steering group, and we've had a couple of consultations on the principles to date. So it's been more of a background activity, but I think actually now it will come to the foreground because of that leadership focus.
So just, I mean, on that, you know, why now? Why, given everything that's going on, why do you think the writers decided that this was a good time to publish it out?
Partly because I think it was just ready and they just needed to get it off the desk. You know, we've been waiting for quite a long time for this. I think it was almost, you know, it feels like it's almost a year ago that we were kind of expecting something to come out. Understandably, it's quite a difficult document to get agreement around. But I was just looking back at the covering note that Universities UK sent with the Concordat when they launched it about 10 days ago. And it's partly because they don't want to delay any further. So obviously they've launched the Concordat. There's no implementation expected for at least a year. But they felt that the principles embedded in the Concordat are really important now and will be important as we come, you know, as we go into the recovery phase for COVID-19. So I think, so that's why they've released it now, so that those, as we start to think about how knowledge exchange can help to get us out of the situation we find ourselves in, though the Concordat principles can be embedded as we go along. Okay,
and it's, I mean, it's very, in some ways it's very vague, I guess on purpose, or non-specific. Maybe vague's not it's non-specific, but I guess there's a danger that by being non-specific it doesn't enable anything to be achieved. So do you think there's something in it for that every university is going to be able to use?
Yeah, I think yes, there will be something that every university can use. Some universities will be able to kind of quickly look through all the principles and say, you know, tick, 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 you know, they'll have something that they can respond to without thinking too hard, really. And if you've got a HIFE strategy in place, if you've been thinking about a civic university agreement perhaps, or a local industrial strategy, then you've done that kind of groundwork that the principles are talking about. Other universities may not be quite so, I suppose, you know, Concordat ready in that respect. But yeah, it's difficult in such a diverse sector. I mean, we know this from work we've done with through PraxisAuril on the advocacy side, trying to create messages that are applicable to everybody, that everybody feels they can absolutely, you know, get behind and support, are difficult when you've got to respect the diversity of the sector, allow everybody to play to their strengths, and yet also be a bit of a stick and say that you've got to embed these kinds of activities alongside your research and teaching missions now. You know, it is quite a tall order.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So and there's no stated link to funding, although I guess it's implied through potentially HIFE. Is that, do you see that coming in down the line, that the whole the KEC, the KEF all joining together in some way?
I think it's inevitable at some point that the metrics and the Concordat will all come together. Obviously, this is where I think the context, we need to be better at bringing things together, because we do tend to talk, you know, we're having this conversation now about the Concordat. Yesterday I was involved with some other PraxisAuril members talking about HIFE evaluation models, you know, logic models, thinking about outputs from that particular funding line. We've had separate conversations about the KEF. So I think our job at PraxisAuril, you know, and in the membership, is to now bring all these things together. So see how the Concordat sits alongside the metrics, sits alongside the current HEBC data categories, for example, sits alongside proposals for how we might think about assessing HIFE in a different way. And certainly, you know, the place of narrative and case studies alongside metrics, I think, will be really important when it comes to the Concordat, and universities talking about how they're actually doing the work of knowledge exchange.
So, I mean, you touched on it there around assessment, and that's implicit in the KEF, but assessment for the KEC, how do you think, you know, how there's mentions of assessment panels, and Phil Clare, a PraxisAuril patron, is chairing that assessment panel, but that process of getting whatever you're, you know, you sign up to it and then it's rubber stamped, or?
Yeah, so that isn't entirely clear yet, and I know the intention of UK and Guild HE, who own the document, is to put more information on the Knowledge Exchange Concordat portal that they've launched. I think the intention is to have some webinars, and certainly they've asked us to feed in any particular questions that we want to ask about the implementation phase, and that's certainly something I've asked about, is just how are they going to go about evaluating all the implementation plans and assessing how successful those plans are being implemented. I imagine there will be some look through to the KEF metrics data that's coming out. You know, you can measure a certain amount of activity in those metrics, but in terms of, you know, internal communication, external communication about universities' mission in knowledge exchange, what it's trying to achieve, and that kind of knowledge exchange profile, it is going to be quite challenging, I think, and it'll be interesting to see what Phil and his group come up with, but we're in good hands if Phil Clare's chairing, frankly. So.
Yeah. I mean, I guess having reviewed the document again prior to speaking, I mean, there's a comment from Amanda Soloway, which I thought was quite interesting. Starts a focus on higher education leaders developing and nurturing their staff and students to engage with the wider world. So it's definitely pitched at the very highest level, and it seems to be almost a top-down approach to marry up with potentially a more bottom-up KEF. And in some ways, I thought is the Concordat actually, it's defining the system or the area in which you're going to operate, and then the KEF is actually measuring how good you are.
Yeah, I think it's so when it was launched, we had a comment back, I think, from one of the directors that this really, you know, this went in at the top level, that kind of C-suite discussion, I think he called it. So really putting knowledge exchange at the Vice Chancellor, Pro-Vice Chancellor level of discussion. And I think that is absolutely the intention. It goes back to that principle of leadership that Trevor Macmillan talked about in his report. That could be a two-edged sword, you know, as soon as an activity gets to that level within a university, you know, suddenly there is more scrutiny about that activity. But I think that was inevitable anyway. If we're going to be looking for more money for HIFE, for example, or just other types of knowledge exchange funding to sit alongside HIFE, then we've got to expect a greater level of scrutiny. And actually having Vice Chancellors endorsing this activity through the Concordat and saying, this is a really important plank of our activity, this is how we're doing it, this is why we're doing it, and these are the outcomes that we want to achieve, that's all very good, you know, material. It's all good ammunition for us to then go back to Treasury and say, well, if this is what you want our institutions to do, these are the tools that they need to do it with.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess there's a point from Trevor in that document. He's making the observation that it's to enhance the reputation through continuous evolution and improvement. So there's definitely, this isn't a, you know, write it once and then stick it on a shelf. There's a definite expectation that whatever you set out to do, you're continuously looking at that and trying to improve from an internal audit point of view. But also there's a big bit about benchmarking both nationally and internationally. Yeah,
and I think, you know, the principles that really relate to PraxisAuril's core activity of training and professional development are kind of the second half of the principles, 5 to 8, where it does talk about that continuous improvement. It talks about self-assessment as an important part of continuous improvement, but about the sharing of good practice at different levels, and yes, nationally, but also internationally. So we're well placed to do that because of our links with Autumn in the US, with KCN Australia, with ATP in Europe. And, you know, we know that Sean Fielding has so if you go to the KE Concordat portal, the definition of knowledge exchange that's on there is the definition that was agreed by the ATTP group. And of course, that that should, I hope, encourage more people to think about RTTP, that recognised technology transfer professional qualification, which you know, is an international benchmarking standard that people can aspire to. So yeah, of course it's got, you know, there's lots of things that PraxisAuril needs to start thinking about in terms of how we help our members to equip themselves as best they can to meet the requirements of the Concordat. But I think that's all, it's all helpful for us, particularly at a time when we're thinking about how we respond to the crisis in terms of our training programme and carrying our members with us.
Yeah, I mean, there is under, so the principle number 5, capacity building, there's an explicit mention about development of KE staff, and in fact it's put out separately from you know, academic staff. So in terms of making sure that our communities being thought about by those leading the institutions, then I'm not sure we could ask for much better. And I'm just wondering from a practitioner point of view, how much extra work do you think this is going to be? Is this going to be handed down from on high and said, help me to fill this in? Or do you think, well, that's probably the ideal solution, isn't it? You get a hand in writing what we have to end up doing.
Well, that's why it's a slightly double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, the intention, as always, is not to create more burden, but everything that comes out these days says that's not the intention. I think inevitably it'll get passed down. You know, there might, again, that'll come down to internal relationships and internal structures. So what is the, you know, how far is the reporting line between, you know, your research office or TTO or enterprise office director and the vice chancellor or the PVC who's responsible for this area? Is there a good relationship there? Is there a team of 2? Is there a team of 10? Is there a team of 25? You know, we know how much that varies across the sector. The upside is that it might give some people chance to have that direct conversation with pro-vice chancellors and vice chancellors about knowledge exchange, which they haven't maybe had the opportunity to do before. But I think inevitably it'll come down to, you know, our member directors. They'll be asked to do probably the bulk of the thinking about the missions and the principles and how they can respond at an institutional level, and then they'll probably get finessed by the leaders, I should think.
Yes. That's a great term. So yeah, I mean, because it does have the potential to make the role of the KE professional within the institution much more visible than may have been in the past, and it certainly should allow, through some of the key aims that the Concordat sets out, you know, a clear approach, and not just for those looking to interact with the university from outside, but also for staff and students to understand what, at the highest level in the university, what they are and what types of activities they want to encourage.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I was talking to somebody yesterday about expectations around research staff for knowledge exchange, and we were saying that we thought it was maybe there was a generational thing going on here. You know, the younger, maybe even slightly more mid-career academics now who are coming through and starting to lead some of this work, some knowledge exchange work. You know, they've been through certainly one ref cycle where impact was taken into account. They're approaching the second iteration of that with impact. They kind of know what they're in for now. They may have had some enterprise training. So I think that's true that the academic base might be more ready for this kind of agenda now. So that's good, because they then tend to go into those PVC positions in particular. It's interesting how much the Concordat talks about students as well, which isn't an area where PraxisAuril is typically engaged, but we know lots of our members are very engaged in student enterprise, and you know, the degree apprenticeships is really bringing that kind of teaching student KE role on board, and the Office for Students has got their projects rolling out at the moment around students. So it's definitely making that KE office, however whether it is a physical central office or more dispersed, into a, you know, it's a kind of core activity, a core function for the university now. I think there'll be a lot of internal comms that need doing around this, as well as external communications. I'm still a bit sceptical as to how much external partners will engage with the Concordat for knowledge exchange. you know, they didn't really bite around the metrics terribly well. So whether they'll bite that much harder around a Concordat, I don't know.
I mean, I guess it might be that they pick it up, so it's not a direct that they feel the Concordat's made a difference, but some of the, if you look through some of the enablers that they talk around the areas, and they talk about clarity on things, IP policy, all this types of stuff, which I'm sure, you know, we've heard rumblings from various businesses wanting to understand better what goes on. So I guess if a university picks up those, chooses those enablers to articulate what it's going to do, then that should give better clarity. See, I guess that list of enablers is quite extensive.
Yeah, and there's things like having an obvious front door, which is something that has always come back to. I think it, you know, it might. I know that some universities will already have a very much an account management function, you know, so that you know absolutely who's kind of looking after you as you navigate through the university and think about different ways to do knowledge exchange. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure, you know, eventually it will translate into what we've always hoped for. I think better recognition of the activity and, you know, our members' roles in making that activity happen, not just being a kind of ignored middle and not appreciated for the skills that they bring to those, you know, the research breakthroughs and then the IPOs at the other end that kind of suddenly come out of nowhere. So that recognition and a greater professionalisation of the function as well within universities.
Okay, great. I'm just about finished my copy. So will we see if there's anybody who's been listening and wants to ask any questions? So if you want to ask something, if you want to raise your hand, and we can bring you in. If there's anybody interested in that, I'm trying a very small window to view the chat, and there was
a comment from Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Do you want to? Is there anything in there that we could comment on, Tamsin?
Well, I'll just comment on. So Dan King at Research Consulting, obviously on continuous improvement. It's difficult, isn't it? And I know that at PraxisAuril, well, probably a couple of years ago now, we did look at kind of self-assessment frameworks and tried to get a bit more understanding of how individual knowledge exchange teams went about assessing, you know, quality of service and things like that. This is something that we've been grappling with for quite a long time, I think. So I think continuous improvement is an area that we'll all need to talk about more in terms of what's a good solution, but what doesn't overburden, you know, teams when they're having to do so much reporting in terms of metrics anyway, potentially doing lots of, you know, narratives on activity, and then thinking about the quality of service that you're getting from an internal function. I don't know how much other professional functions within universities are affected by that same phenomenon. So there may be things we can learn from other functions within universities in that respect.
Okay, would it be fair to say that the Concordat tries in some ways to help universities feel empowered to focus on specific areas of KE activity, so that there might be the potential that rather than having to take a very broad brush, you can actually say we're going to focus on this, and therefore, you know, doing innovative and continuous improvement activities would focus in on maybe a bit of a narrower area? Yeah,
I think that's and I mean that's always been the kind of line that's been taken around the KEF metrics as well. It's that it's not meant to. None of this activity is meant to imply that every university should try to do every kind of knowledge exchange. I think the really important thing is understanding why you do what you do, why you might choose not to do spin-outs, for example, which is obviously the one that always makes the headlines, and why you might choose to have a much bigger focus on CPD, for example. So I think as long as you can justify it, and it's clear from the way that you then, I suppose, structure your outward facing resources. So you've got a clear CPD engagement function, and you've clearly got academics lined up who can deliver that CPD service, then that's going to be fine.
Right, so we've got Francis Clark's raised their hand. So if you give me 2 seconds, I'll unmute you and turn your, you'll be asked if you want to turn your video on, if you want to join us and make your point. Hi.
Hello. That's a really good discussion, and I was just wondering the role of comms and marketing teams at the universities is, I mean, they need to be involved. Is there much feedback as to how many have got comms and marketing involved in knowledge exchange assessment, or ways as a way of capturing?
Yeah, I don't know is the honest answer, Francis. I know, obviously, you know, we know some of the very large institutions have got their own marketing functions. Clearly, they can, you know, there's some input we can have from them. But I think there'll be a need for PraxisAuril members to go and do that, you know, to do that explaining role of what the Concordat is and what knowledge exchange is, for many different staff groups, actually. But I agree with you. I think that those communication and marketing teams have got a big role in this, because they'll be required really to kind of sell the services, even if they're not embedded within a research office or a TTO. They're going to need, they're a channel to market, aren't they? So they do need to be brought on board.
It's also changing the profile of the university in question, and that's part of their role anyways, to reflect that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Francis. Well, we're almost bang on past, so I think maybe we'll wrap it up. Tamsin, is there any final points or comments you want to make?
I would just say, you know, go and read the Concordat and think about the principles that are there. Think about what you already do. What you know, in terms of engagement with PraxisAuril, what we need to understand is where you think we're providing sufficient support for you to meet the principles that are particularly the 5 to 8 principles around CPD and that kind of thing, and tell us what more we could do to support that. You know, my job is to really join up different bits of the policy environment. Alasdair's kind of overseeing that professional development remit. So between us, you know, I hope that we can give you the tools that will help that implementation phase when it comes next year.
Okay, thanks, Tamsin. So as Tamsin says, the Concordat, they have their own website. It's Concordat, all one word, .ac.uk. You can find more details there. We'll post the Concordat document up onto our online community. If you've not been in there, then please give that a go. If your organisation is a member of PraxisAuril, you automatically have an account there. You can go on and join in the discussions, and maybe start a bit of discussion around the themes of the Concordat on there. We did a quick conversation with Sean Fielding, our chair, this morning. He was keen to progress the discussion about the Concordat, and so Sean is hopefully going to get in touch with Trevor McMillan from Keele, and they'll do a more in-depth question and answer session with Trevor at some point in the future, so look out for that coming through. Finally, just I guess on behalf of Tamsin and I, thanks so much for sharing part of your afternoon with us. Stay safe. We hope to do these every week, depending on what other things we get dragged into. If you've got suggestions about topics or policy papers or whatever that we might want to have a look at, then drop either Tamsin or I a note, and we'll get in touch. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Bye. Bye.